Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to our global Nimble community. This is John Farrar. I'm super excited to have this particular audience here with me today. Um, I've got four of my dear friends to help us learn about how to apply the power of storytelling, influencer marketing, to help you grow and scale your business today and in the future. This particular panel is unique in that it really has a cross section of some of the world's leading digital marketing teachers, preachers, and authors. Starting out with Brian Carter on the left. Brian's a popular speaker, best-selling author, and marketing agency owner. He's built marketing programs for companies like Microsoft and NBC and the Army and Humana, and he's frequently included in Bloomberg TV, Forbes, Wall Street Journal, and his agency, Brian Carter Group, helps companies of all sizes use advertising content and landing pages to drive eyeballs and results. Next, we've got Sam Fiorella. Sam, he actually wrote the book on influencer marketing, how to create and manage and measure influencer marketing, which is now being used across colleges and universities in the United States and Canada. He's focused on building lifetime value for companies through acquisition strategies, influencer marketing, affinity programs, and he's doing it. He's been doing it for a long time. I'm not even going to tell you how long he's been doing it, but Sam, you've been doing it longer than I have. And he's currently a partner at Sensei Marketing, helping drive customer experience and improvements for companies worldwide. And then we've got Marcy Masura. Marcy is a leader in emerging media, mainstream marketing, helping companies navigate the landscape and develop smart, effective, integrated engagement solutions. She's a voice for forward-thinking strategies. She's published articles in Holmes Report, PR News, and frequently quoted in places like Mashable, Forbes, Inc., and other leading publications. And then finally, last but certainly not least, Lee Yoden. I always love to hear Lee speak. He is always flying and always speaking, and I think that if you teach people how to fish, they'll figure out you sell fishing poles. And his top-ranked blog is one of the top blogs in the world. His agency, Top Rank Marketing, is a team of people that help major brands around the world like Dell, SAP, 3M, LinkedIn, and Oracle. He's been cited in pretty much every major publication, including Wall Street Journal, Economist, Forbes, and he's done over 250 presentations in 17 countries. Lee, you must be a Million Mile Flyer recipient. Do you have that yet?
At least once.
At least once. Okay. So I'm not sure if people can see your cameras or they see our screen. Can you guys tell me?
Could be both, I think.
Okay.
I can see.
All right, great. So before we get into the Q&A with this panel, I just wanted to share some stories about influence and influencer marketing. And I think that a lot of people think that influencer marketing is new. And actually it's not. It's been happening for a long time. People have been using storytelling to stay top of mind with their customers, their prospects, their community since the beginning of time. And ultimately, it's all about staying top of mind because, as Mae West said, and I love this quote, I say it a lot, but I'll say it again, out of sight is out of mind, and out of mind is out of money, honey. What do you want to do? You want to be able to become that trusted advisor with your prospect customer and ideally their influencers so that they not only pick up the phone and call you, but they drag their friends with them. And the best way to do that is rather than telling other people about how great you are or your products are, you could teach them how to be great, because I really believe that people buy better versions of themselves. They don't buy great products, and that if you teach people to fish, they'll figure out you sell fishing poles. And so if you just give your knowledge away on a daily basis, you will build trust, intimacy, and influence with key people you need to grow your business, which brings me to a story. Defiance Milk. Defiance Milk is a powdered milk company out of New Zealand. And back in the late 1800s, they were competing to sell their powdered milk worldwide. And they tried advertising, and they weren't really successful with that advertising, even though they put that ad on the front page of the major newspaper in London. And so what happened was accidentally somebody at the company started to compile questions from mothers about how to use powdered milk to feed their babies. And ultimately, that became something called the Glaxo Baby Book, because Defiance wasn't a great term or name or brand for milk. So they changed it to Glaxo, and the Glaxo Baby Book became a bestseller larger than the Bible worldwide, where mothers used it to determine how to raise their babies effectively. And that turned Glaxo into not only the biggest powdered milk company, but the largest pharmaceutical company in the world. They're now called GlaxoSmithKline. And so influencer marketing isn't anything new. In fact, it's the way that I built two global technology companies. And I'm going to briefly tell you how I did that. Imagine if you pioneered contact management and CRM before Outlook or Salesforce existed, that you're sitting in an apartment in Canoga Park, which is a suburb of Los Angeles. You got $5,000 in the bank. You got a really bitchin' software program that runs on networks and integrates email, contact, and calendar and sales and market automation. But how do you sell it? There's only 8, maybe 24 hours in the day that you could sell. So what I did is identified the key influencer of my prospect in and around the areas of promise for my product. That was the resellers that were selling networks to small businesses. And I cold called them all, 500 Novell resellers, and I got them to use it because people sell what they know and they know what they use. They started to resell it. That's how we got to our first $100,000 a month in revenue. And then we latched on to Microsoft, building integrations with SQL Server, Exchange Server, and NT Server, and turning the 100,000 plus Microsoft resellers into Goldmine resellers. And that's how I retired at 40. But after raising 3 babies for 10 years, I got back in the market. When I started using social, and I saw that it was going to change the way we work, play, buy, and sell. And I started looking for a relationship manager that integrated with social. I couldn't find it. Then I started looking at CRM systems. So they weren't about relationships. They're about reporting. And I decided to build the first CRM that works for you by building itself and works with you everywhere, something called Nimble, which helped pioneer social selling CRM. But how did I do that? Because I'd been out of business for 10 years. I was a dad for 10 years. Technology moves so quick. I had to build my brand and the Nimble brand. And what I did was I identified influencers in and around Nimble's promise, social sales and marketing, started to share their content, hashtag it appropriately, attribute the writer's name. And that's how we built a global brand for Nimble that is a world-class brand worldwide. It is one of the market leaders in CRM. And that enabled us to then build relationships again with Microsoft, where Microsoft signed a reseller agreement with Nimble, and they are now reselling Nimble globally through their resellers. And basically, history is repeating itself. I'm using storytelling, getting other people to tell those stories in order to build relationships that are pay it forward that gets us to today. Because each of these people on this webinar are close friends that I've nurtured a relationship for a long time that started because they inspired me. I was moved by their content, by their education, by their storytelling. I started to share their content and their stories, and that's how we ended up with this webinar where we're now going to learn from them what is the state of influencer marketing and how we can use influencer marketing to grow our businesses. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off my my slides. And are we looking at the cameras now? Do we see all the pictures of the people?
Brady Bunch time.
So.
Okay, there we are. So first off, Sam, Marcy, Lee, and Brian, thank you again so much for joining this panel. And let's start with the first question. What is the state of influencer marketing in the B2B and B2C space? Marcy?
Well, sure. How about start off with a giant question? Let me see if I can surmise rather quickly. Influencer marketing started as very much a bolt-on tactic. It was an idea. It was something that we would throw a little extra money to and see how it went. Generally, it was often an afterthought or a tactic that was brought to the table when other things weren't working. Now it's evolved. It is really part of any holistic marketing strategy has influencer marketing as part of it, embedded in part of it. And it's become on par with media relations. So if you're doing a complete holistic marketing push for a brand or an organization, you're going to look at all the categories from digital and social and paid media and public relations, media relations, and influencer relations. So I won't say that it's reached the level that every brand is doing it. I don't know any who aren't. So if you're not, you're in the right place for starters. But of course, we're here to talk about B2B and B2C and look at some of the differences. And as I think about the differences, I actually come up with more similarities than not. There are some differences in where you speak, so where you're looking for influencers. B2B can be, obviously, LinkedIn becomes the holy grail platform in that space. Of course, it can be done anywhere. Humans are across all platforms. And also, one of the real hot trends and possibly some of the differences in the landscape right now is we're seeing a lot of organizations looking internally for influencers through employee platform programs and employee social advocacy. So this is a fairly new entrant, not super new, but this is definitely part of the landscape now that we didn't have people, it wasn't as important even 5 years ago. One thing to note about influencer marketing as it pertains to B2B and B2C in the landscape is the vernacular and the nomenclature. So some of you may be familiar with the phrase KOL or key opinion leader or subject matter expert. What we're seeing is a real leveling between those now, that those are individuals of influence. So it's something to keep your eye on, and I think the team will be talking about it further down the road. And lastly, one thing I wanted to touch on is that influencer marketing is not a sort of a single bullet concept. It looks and feels very different depending on the organization, the category of business. CPG is wildly different, even in the B2B space, to get on shelf than, say, a SaaS company. So influencer marketing can take the shape of using influencers for talent and asking them to self-syndicate, but also perhaps they're planning an event on your behalf, or they're a participant in an event. But ultimately, when I'm asked what is influencer marketing today, I say it is content partnership with self-syndication. And that is probably the best summary I can give for the landscape today.
Marcy, that was great. Thank you so much. Lee, I know you've got some really great experience in both B2B and B2C. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think, and I really appreciate what Marcy said, and especially that summary, content collaboration and self-syndication, that really resonates, I think. B2C is attracting a lot of attention in the influencer marketing space. And I think a lot of consumers think of influencer marketing. If you say the word influencer, they think of a Kardashian holding up a healthcare product or a beauty product or something like that. And so B2B is something that's a little bit newish to people at large when it comes to working with influencers. I think that, there's a study that we partnered with Tracker and Altimeter Group on, and Brian Solis wrote the report. And one of the B2B metrics was that B2B is woefully behind B2C when it comes to levels of sophistication, investment, and effectiveness when it comes to influencer marketing. Since that report has come out, that gap is definitely closing a little bit, but B2C has definitely been a space where a lot more investment has occurred when it comes to influencer marketing. B2C is also where you're going to find a lot more issues with, compliance, disclosure, fake followers, and that sort of thing, because it's sort of a land grab in some cases where you have these marketplaces where individuals can just self-anoint themselves with influencer status. They can go sign up to make more money online and become inventory against which brands can go shop and look for someone to create Instagram stories or YouTube videos or Snapchat stories or something like that for money. And that doesn't describe the totality of B2C, of course, but it's something that does exist, and it creates a lot of opportunism and bad behavior, if you will. In B2B, there are some big differences. Rather than people being famous per se, they are subject matter. They have to be a subject matter expert, and they tend to have niche and active networks that are paying attention to what they have to say, but they're not necessarily playing the game of being an influencer. So one of the big differences, I think, is how you approach influencers in B2B, and that these are people who are not necessarily thinking of themselves as someone who can go out and be a keynote speaker, be a book author, and so on and so forth. They're someone who is really deep into a particular area of subject matter, and so approaching them really isn't so much about exposure, but maybe peer recognition or something for the greater good, as an example. Another big difference, I think, in B2B is that with a lot of B2B purchases, we're talking a long sales cycle, 6 months, 12 months, 12 months plus, rather than a spontaneous purchase you make because you saw someone pimping a product on Instagram stories or something like that. So that means there's a lot of opportunity to collaborate with influencers on content over a longer period of time. In fact, across the entire customer lifecycle, from awareness to interest, consideration, and even into retention and advocacy. And one of the things Marcy said is that I think influence is becoming more of an integrated thing in businesses. And I think we're seeing this a lot more in B2B, in that we're seeing influencers being incorporated into things like talent acquisition, right? Where who's successful in a particular career field. If our business, our B2B business is recruiting in that field, which successful people can we highlight as part of our recruiting efforts? Or even in customer service, where we are activating people in our community, we're activating employees to be influencers, if you will, when it comes to service. And obviously public relations is pretty obvious, where we can incorporate influencers into our earned media efforts. So it's becoming more of a holistic effort. And I see B2B doing a great job in this area, as opposed to only looking to advocate for product purchase or service purchase. It's something that can add value across that entire customer relationship. The last thing I'd say about B2B is, traditionally, B2B programs have focused very much on events. So let's bring 10 let's bring 10 subject matter experts to our conference and have them live blog. Let's have them share on social. Let's have them interview our executives at the brand and create content that way. Or they were very focused on campaigns. So there's a very specific start and stop campaign. Influencers are invited to collaborate. The campaign would be run and then it would be done. And what we're starting to see a lot more of is always on engagement, where investments are being made into platforms that allow for continuous monitoring and for engagement to occur with those influencers in between those campaigns, in between those events, so that we can keep those relationships alive and keep them healthy. Because in B2B, paying influencers is less frequent. And the only thing to stop another B2B competitor from stealing your influencer is the strength of your relationship. So that always on element is very, very important.
Lee, I think that's a really great point. And always on includes connecting and building intimacy and trust with that influencer beyond the business relationship, where you connect on what I call the 5 F's of life: family, friend, food, fun, and fellowship. And that's why sometimes having a glass of whiskey with Sam and smoking a cigar is going to endear you to his heart more than you basically shouting his book out. But Brian, let's talk a little bit about B2C. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, some great stuff's already been said. So all I really want to add is just the fact that I'm seeing similar things in influencer marketing to what we've seen pretty much in all of digital marketing and advertising, in terms of like goals, what goals people are going after and how they're tracking them, which is that there are a lot, when it comes to social media or content marketing or influencer marketing, there are a lot of big brands that go after engagement and branding. And then there are a lot of small businesses and medium-sized businesses that go after sales and profits because they have to, right? It's funny to me, a lot of times people idolize Fortune 500 businesses. They're like, I want to use Fortune 500 techniques, right? But the fact is, a lot of times, for a lot of reasons, organizational or otherwise, red tape or whatever, like the Fortune 500 companies are only doing top of funnel stuff, and they often have all these obstacles to tracking and achieving sales, and that's not always true. But these small businesses, these medium-sized businesses, they have to get direct sales. They have to get profits. And so, whether we're working with them or we're hearing stories, or, when I keynote to groups and I talk to these businesses, have you used bloggers, et cetera, they tell me stories where they've paid bloggers or they've used them, they've gotten sales from it, right? And that's what they're focused on. So now that we can track that stuff, everybody's doing different things, but we know that we can get sales and profits from influencers. So my hope is that more and more people, when they can, will focus on that.
Those are some great thoughts, Brian. I think on the B2C side, what I'm seeing kind of interesting is that local brands are connecting with local micro influencers in order to help build connections. And I'll give you an example. Erewhon Market is a market in my neighborhood. It's sort of a health food conscious place. If you're ever in Santa Monica, definitely go to Erewhon. It's great. But I shoot pictures at places because I'm a photographer and I love to tell stories. A lot of times local brands, they retweet my stuff and share it. And I think they're not doing it necessarily because I have X amount of followers, but maybe because I'm a local person, they like the photo and they're just sort of connecting with the community. And ultimately, influencers, like Lee said, aren't just Kardashians. It could be a guy named John Ferrara who's a nobody in Santa Monica who people share their, my stuff. So let's talk about some campaigns that describe your favorite marketing influencer campaigns that you've seen in the past year or two. So let's start on that with Lee.
Sure. So with my B2B focus, I'm going to give a B2B example. There's a company called Profix, which is a company in the a software company in the financial planning and accounting industry, which isn't exactly known for the sexiest or funnest of marketing campaigns. And so as a goal, they wanted to come in through thought leadership and create some awareness level exposure for themselves in a very unique way to draw attention to a report that they had done on the future of business finance. And so rather than just publishing the report and using paid media to amplify it, what they did is they worked with us to identify some brand new influencers they didn't have relationships with in the finance industry to collaborate with on the content. Obviously, the idea is to borrow to build. If you want influence about a particular thing, find people who already have that influence, connect with them, collaborate with them, make something together for the greater good of the industry, and that influence will be imparted upon you, which you can then give back, and it becomes a very self-reinforcing cycle. And so once these influencers were identified, because no relationship existed with them, and we didn't have a lot of time, we had to hit the ground running. What we did is we started simply by recognizing a list of 25 financial planning and accounting influencers in a list post, just a traditional listicle post. This got us on their radar, and we used that as an opportunity to invite them to collaborate on this campaign. And we had a very large close ratio, if you will, a yes ratio, as a result of warming the market up a little bit by giving them recognition. And from a creative standpoint, we decided to pick something that you wouldn't normally find in the financial planning and accounting industry, and that is a Candy Crush inspired quiz, where the quiz questions were being provided by the influencers that were involved in collaborating on the campaign. So we had this gamey, interactive sort of element to it with a particular creative or aesthetic that everyone could relate to. And of course, we created cartoon avatars for all the influencers, and we created this quiz asset. We also created complementary assets. So we did create a traditional PDF version of the content. We created an infographic. We did long form interviews with the influencers, and then a whole portfolio of social graphics and social shares and that sort of thing. So as a result, this thing, which was, again, different than what you'd normally find in that industry, had 15 times the number of social shares over anything they had published before. In fact, over half of the influencers actively promoted this was the most viewed content this company has had in the last 12 months. And 25% of the people that interacted with the asset downloaded the report, which was the conversion metric they were after. So the fun story about this is that was a single campaign. It was actually a pilot. So that went so well, they followed it up with another campaign to draw attention to a new capability for their software. They're developing right now how to incorporate machine learning and artificial intelligence into this financial planning software. And so before they've even launched that capability, they want to create awareness around this as a thing to be concerned about, to be looking forward to in the industry. So again, we developed a new project where we identified financial technology and artificial intelligence and machine learning experts to provide their expertise. And the context or the creative was around voice assistants. So, obviously Alexa, Google Home, Siri. Well, we created a new persona called Penny. And so the experience as a microsite was that you navigate through the audio, Penny talking to you, asking you questions, you pick answers, which then are delivered to you via audio. And of course, it's the influencers giving audio recordings. This just launched. It's had over almost 200% increase in views over the previous campaign. And the engagement is insane, 642% more engagement than the last campaign. And like I said, it's just started, so I don't have the conversion metrics that we would normally report just yet, but it's something that they're actually developing more into a sub-brand. So this Meet Penny persona is now going to be used in a follow-on campaign, and they'll continue it, I think, through the rest of 2019.
Lee, that's some great examples of B2B influencer marketing. I also love the one that you shared with me yesterday about Surewell software, where they generated 20% of the leads for the whole company for the whole year off of that one campaign that you'd worked on them with them on. Sam, we haven't heard from you. The audience is dying to hear from you. They want to make sure that your mic actually works. So before you give us an example of a influencer marketing campaign that you think is significant from the past year or two, can you give us a definition of influencer marketing? Because I don't think we really defined that. And before you do that, I want to encourage the audience to ask questions, because we all learn by questions. And so even if you want to know something silly, please ask it. Even if it where Sam gets his haircut and how he stays looking so handsome. Sam, what is influencer marketing? And tell us an example of a campaign that you think is unique.
Well, in general, for me, influence marketing is a marketing tactic that utilizes either individuals or groups of individuals to sway public perception or, more importantly, in my opinion, purchase behaviors of your consumers in favor of your brand. So getting them to think a little bit differently than they might have otherwise thought, getting them to be aware of a product that maybe they wouldn't otherwise, have interfaced or seen within their social streams or in their lives, and or to get a competitor to consider your product and buy your product over someone else's. The one thing that I'd like to call out, though, is that influence marketing isn't always limited to social media. I think it was Lee that said you think of the Kardashians right away. Most people also think social media right away, B2B or B2C, Kardashians or not. 50% of the influence marketing campaigns that we run here don't touch social media in any capacity. Influence is exerted across multiple channels, and it could be just through earned media that you're getting from a pickup in a newspaper that could drive a specific result, because an influencer.
Well, I'd argue that Amazon is a great example of influence. I'm influenced by all the reviews I read of the other people like me that are using the product, and I end up buying because of that influence. So it's absolutely not social media.
Well, I can tell you that the book, the book you referenced that my partner Danny and I wrote, we are now in a variety of universities. Our book is being taught as a postgraduate program because of a few comments that were made by professors in the Amazon reviews. Other professors saw it, they trusted that, oh, this is a professor. They've said that this is not an easy read. This is definitely an academic postgraduate read. So those professors teaching postgraduate influence marketing or marketing have picked it up. And in fact, now I'm teaching at a college a course based on the book because of that. So you can see how that's influence marketing right there, right? It's using an individual's status or expertise or relationship with their audience and their opinion and their recommendation to sway it, which then leads into what your second question. That you had so many questions in there, I'm not even sure I'm going to catch all. The second question, which was an example of an influence marketing campaign, and the one that I like to talk about quite a bit is Ringling College of Art and Design, and it's a B2B and B2C technically, because we've actually focused on two different groups here. In a nutshell, it is a private college in Florida, Sarasota, right on the beach. It's an incredible art college, but they had a challenge, and that is that a lot of parents don't like to send their kids to an art college. There's a perception out there that, the starving artist, you become a painter, you become a graphic artist, and you're going to starve. There isn't enough money. Become a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, or something like that. And so they were noticing that they were having a hard time getting kids to convert. So while students would apply and would get accepted, they weren't always accepting that. And they'd end up at NYU or something like that, taking a business course because their parents convinced them that that was where they were going to make more money. So what we did in a minute, basically, giving you the high level, is we decided to identify who would influence the two people making the decision, the student applying and then the parent who's going to agree to send their child there or not. And what we discovered is that it wasn't macro influencers or it wasn't celebrities at all. It was other students who are already in the college and past graduates of the college who have gone on to be the head of Sony, the head of design at Pixar, have won Oscars. And so we created a website, an online community that allowed students who were thinking about pursuing a career in the arts and parents who were following up with their children in terms of where they were going to go. They got to speak directly to students as well as past graduates who were making 150, 200 and millions of dollars and winning Oscars. And so what we found is in that engagement, and not just at the point of making the decision, we were engaging students in first year of high school and encouraging them through the students and through these other influencers from grade 9, first grade of high school, to your second year, to your third year, to your fourth year, when you were actually pulling the trigger. And then once we had them in the database, we can now continue to work with them while they're in school. They become the mentors, and then when they go on and become alumni. So in a nutshell, that was really the influence marketing program. It wasn't necessarily about identifying a high follower count in a celebrity or somebody else. It was creating a community where we can connect decision makers with those who can influence that decision.
Sam, this is something that touches close to home for me because my wife, who got a full ride for undergrad and grad to UCLA, was wanted to study art in undergrad, and her parents wouldn't let her study art. They forced her to study kinesiology, which is sort of like a pre-med thing. And then she got a master's in public health, and she didn't like what she did. She did healthcare consulting for some number of years, but when she had our children, she went back to school and got a degree in master gardening, color theory, textile, landscape design, and horticulture therapy. So now she's designing gardens for kids in need, and she loves it. And so I think that that's a powerful story about you don't necessarily need big influencers. They're just people that create the re-influence you want.
Yeah.
And so
I want to take exception also to something Lee said. I think B2B influence marketing is sexy. And not just because that's what we do, but I think it's sexy.
No, what I said, Sam, is that there's not enough. It's just, you just don't find enough of it.
Yeah,
that's true.
So, Marcy, you've got a story for us, your favorite campaign.
Yeah.
If you could tell us real quick, we'd love to hear it.
Sure. This speaks to two categories, something I mentioned earlier, which is using influencers as talent, and then also applying paid media to your influencer content. So recently, MM&Co was asked by the Grocery Manufacturers Association to come up with a program that would help support their product, which is an app called Smart Label, and it's super, super cool. And it's an app that actually can tell you where everything was made, what are the allergens, what's the possibility, and it's on about 600,000 products right now. So this is an interesting one because it crosses B2B and B2C. And what we did is we identified an amazing influencer. We scripted, we shot what would be the equivalent of really a commercial quality piece of social content in a grocery store. And what was interesting was the way this it was great content, but the way the content was distributed was interesting because yes, we used the influencers' equity in their community and they self-syndicated this to millions of people. So that was awesome. That was layer one. But layer two, of course, is all the brand-owned properties. They distributed that piece of content. We then also applied something we refer to as adfluence, which is utilizing that influencer content as retargeting them, programmatic retargeting through people who are visiting their website. Yep. This was done with the intention to achieve B2B, so retailers and other brands who they want to also have their brands associated with this app. And then lastly, the big layer of syndication on this was working with all of the brands, so, you know, the P&Gs and the Unilevers and the Coca-Colas, to actually then promote that content on their social as well. So it was a big endeavor. It was one piece of content done very well, but it was a big endeavor in the syndication. And it's something that, I mean, it did really well. It was like a 2 cents per view on a very small paid media. We had 300,000 views of it within a couple weeks. So it did exceptionally well. And the most important part, which is the only metric that matters in this case, was downloads, which were up exponentially almost immediately when it released. So it was a fun project, and I just kind of wanted to show the complexity of how you can utilize influencer content, many different layers of syndication.
Marcy, I think that's a really important point you just brought up is you invest so much in these influencer campaigns and that you need to make them evergreen and repurpose them and reshare them in different aspects. And the whole idea of having a Facebook pixel on your website and then targeting those people specifically with that piece of content, I think is brilliant.
You guys are making me super happy right now. I'm just so glad somebody else said advertising.
Yeah, well, advertising does work. So with that, let's talk about strategies and tips on influencer marketing. And Brian, since your mic is live and you're there, why don't you tell us some key tips and strategies?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, well, one thing I would like to talk about, apart from, I want to underline what Marcy said too, is that, like, I like to tell people, hey, you could have the world's best YouTube video, but if it plays in a forest and no one's around, does it make a sound? Who cares, right? So let's make sure it gets some distribution. Your influencers may have distribution. You can, make that wider with advertising. But another thing we do with advertising tools, and I wrote about this in my latest blog post on briancartergroup.com, check it out, is we have a client that has a network. They are a franchise company of personal trainers, and they've been working with us to expand their business with Facebook ads, and they primarily have used client testimonials and things like that as kind of their influence. Their influencers have been their customers, but they wanted to start using a real celebrity. And of course, it had to match their audience, their customer demographic, which is women over the age of 50. So they found this celebrity that they wanted to use, and we said, well, let us check that person out on Facebook. This person is a real celebrity that people of that age have heard of. So let's see how many people she has as fans and make sure everything matches up. And we could see in Facebook Audience Insights the exact number of active Facebook users that like her, right, on a monthly basis. How many active users like this woman? And since she happens to be not American, and this is an American thing, we're like, does she match, and how many people? And her demographics match. So we checked it, and we checked. So basically using these ad tools, Facebook ad targeting and the audience insights tool in Facebook, we're able to make sure that the company's not making a mistake with their choice of influencer. So that's one tool that we can use. I've got a bunch of others, but I'm sure we want to keep this conversational go around. So
if I take my mic off mute, I work better. Thanks, Brian. So that question was about influencer marketing strategies and tips.
Yeah.
And Lee, do you have some tips that you can share with us?
Sure. So because we've been working with influencers over a long time and plan to continue to do so. And most of the engagement or relationships we have with them are on the organic side. And certainly we believe in advertising and use advertising and pay influencers from time to time. But we really work hard on relationship development and management. And we do that through content. And in fact, we use a method we call modular content. And I know that's an expression that's floated around the marketing world in a lot of different ways. But what I mean by that is when we work with an influencer and we're asking them questions and they provide their expertise in return, we deconstruct that information and we bring it into a repository that includes the influencer's area of expertise, their credentials, as well as keyword tags. So you can imagine over making hundreds of ebooks and different types of influencer assets over time, we have this amazing repository of micro content that we can easily use at any given time to repurpose into other content. So one of the objectives of working with influencers, of course, is to develop a healthy relationship. And so we'll ask them something very simple, very easy, and we'll take a lot of answers and create something with that. That's a very low barrier to entry for them to participate, but it's very high value in return. And then we can take those micro pieces of content and we can use them in other ways for demand gen, thought leadership, and other sorts of applications. All of that gives the influencer added exposure, which in our case is one of the primary reasons why they're collaborating with us. That is for return exposure that they can monetize through paid speaking gigs or book deals or consulting and that sort of thing. So modular content is an approach that is something that you plan for in advance and that you can use to extract tremendous value, additional value out of the influencer's individual contributions, but at the same time, it creates a lot of value back to the influencer as well.
You know, Lee, I think what you just shared is so critical to just repeat, is that if you want to build relationships with influencers, it really has to start with a pay it forward relationship, because you can't go to them with what's in it for me.
Right.
And you certainly shouldn't connect with an influencer and say, would you talk about me or my product? What you should do is you should walk in the digital footprint, add value to their conversation, start sharing their content with your community. And if you ever do or are lucky enough to have a conversation with them, do your homework, learn who they are, what are they about, and enter that conversation with some simple questions. Shut up and listen and find ways to add value, even if it's a simple introduction that you could do for the influencer. But if you do that, if you pay people forward, I think that the world will unfold to you. And that's ultimately why we're, I think that's why we're on this planet. And I say this often, that I feel I'm on this planet to grow my soul by helping other people grow theirs. And that's my simple philosophy of life. And I think that service is the new sales. And I think that you need to enter into every single engagement with the intent to find ways to add value to that other human being, even if it's simply as giving them a smile. Which is why I put my phone down when I'm at the register with grocery people and I actually engage with them and have conversations. Sam, what do you got for us? We're talking about tips and strategies on influencer marketing.
Sure. I can share, I guess, what's I found the most successful with the work that we do. And this wasn't planned, it's just sort of evolved. And we've noticed that this is the most successful because we've tried almost every influence marketing platform and tool out there. Half of them don't make it into production because when we run a test, we realize that it is about general followings as opposed to niche followings and relationships with the end audience. To pick up on something you guys were just talking about, relationships are key. For us, if I was going to talk or share a strategy, it's build your own community. whether you're engaging an existing community and adding value to it, or preferably developing your own community. That's what we have found to be the most successful. And this actually answers one of the questions that from one of the listeners is, how do you deal with situations where you're the small player, you're the little fish, and you're dealing with somebody that has a bigger share? We don't go after them head on. What we do is we go after the customer. We build relationships with the customer by developing a community where our brand facilitates growth to their business on a B2B side, or adds value to their life on a B2C side. And if we can facilitate those conversations and those communities and that data sharing amongst audience members who are our potential clients, then what we have done is developed a relationship from the outside. And then if we're going to use a tool, and this was not planned, this was not paid for, the real tool that we use is Nimble. Because those people get into our Nimble database, it tells us when they're talking about certain products, when we should be reaching out to them. And what we do is we identify who are the influencers within those communities, the ones that are genuinely driving interest and driving links and driving conversations. And then we bring them in to be our influencers. So from a tip perspective, and I know there's only so much time that I have here, but from a tip perspective, that's what I would share. Stop focusing on the influencer, focus on the customer. That's something that I've been saying now for 6 years. You want to be successful in influence marketing, forget the influencer, focus on the customer. What makes them buy something or not buy something? What affects their purchase decision? And then get those people to work on your behalf.
Sam, well, first off, thank you. You're too kind to mention our product. But I think what you said right there is so critically important. And it's exactly what Glaxo did with the milk, right? They didn't basically say how great their milk is. In fact, they tried that. They basically taught moms how they could be better at raising their babies, which taught the moms how to raise babies, which means they buy the milk. And isn't what HubSpot did? HubSpot basically taught people about how to drive eyeballs to a site, but gosh, if you drive eyeballs to a site, you're going to need a market automation system to manage that. And so getting to, you started talking about tools. Brian, you've got a litany of tools here that I see that you've sort of listed here. Can you walk us through some of your favorite tools for identifying, qualifying, and driving conversations?
Sure. I mean, I got 20 in this article I wrote, but I'll give you 5 because we have limited time. So for one thing, and I'll kind of dovetail too on what Sam said, because I think there's 2 ways that you can go after influencers, right? You can go to a marketplace where there are influencers who want to get paid, and everything is set up for you. In fact, the analytics could be even set up and addressed by that platform. So you've got platforms like Thomason and FameBit. FameBit is now owned by YouTube, so you can find a lot of video influencers on there. Or you could go to something like BuzzSumo, which is really just kind of like a meta search engine that'll help you find bloggers and things like that, which, to Sam's point, I think is pretty cool. Like one of the case studies we found in one of my keynotes I did, this guy who found a blogger he wanted to work with, and then they did product giveaways with that blogger. He just had to give away some products to the blogger. I think he gave the blogger $150. That was it. And it boosted his Amazon sales like crazy. So this guy did a lot of B2C business. I mentioned Facebook advertising, Facebook audience insights, and then Aspire IQ. If you are doing your own deal outside of an influencer marketplace, then this is like a CRM type of deal that includes ROI for influencers. So I hope that's not a Nimble competitor. I didn't check. If it is, just use Nimble.
No. Use whatever works. So you keep telling and teaching.
Yeah. There's so anyway, if you are going outside of an influencer marketplace, use some kind of CRM that's going to help you track the ROI. You can use Google Analytics, other things to try and track your influencer ROI. So those are just a few tools.
Great. Does anybody else have any other tools that weren't mentioned that you'd like to share?
Well, I can mention a couple of real quick. There are three do-it-yourself tools that are particularly useful for B2B. And the reason I say they're useful for B2B is because they're not marketplaces. They're not places to shop for influencers so much. They are for you to use on your own to identify, engage, and measure influencer programs. The first one is Tracker, Trackr. Amazing do-it-yourself tool. You can buy services if you want, but you can do everything yourself, and the user experience is amazing. The second tool is called Analytica. Analytica does pretty much the same kinds of things, although you do have to buy services for some of their features. One of the unique features of Analytica is that you can upload content to their system. They'll do text analysis and they'll pop back influencer recommendations based on the topics discussed in that content, which could open doors for you to know who to invite to contribute outside expertise for that particular content asset. The third example I'll give is GroupHive, which is focused on bloggers. And so, if you really want to make sure that you're inviting people who aren't just socially popular, but they're actually authoring blog content, GroupHive is an option for you. And again, all three of these are full platforms, so they're not cheap, but they are definitely worth it.
Lee, I've been a fan of Tracker for a long, long time, and I do recommend that platform as well. I think that, Brian, you did mention BuzzSumo, right? Okay, cool. Anybody else have any other tools, Marcy, Sam, that you recommend before we get to Q&A?
I'd like to just throw my hat in behind Tracker as well. Of all of the full platforms that we've seen, their ability to get the contextual relationship between the identified influencer and their audience is second to none. I've had a lot of conversations with them over the years, the last 4 or 5 years, and they're just getting better and better every year.
And
Cool.
I will just chime in that I have used Tracker as well, works well, but I am really a fan of GroupHive's new model that they have right now, because you can kind of go month to month, so it's a good way to get your toe in the space of playing with a tool, but ultimately it's still about relationships. So tools only get you halfway there.
And isn't GroupHive kind of like a Cision kind of thing, where it's actually like a PR database as well? Or am I mistaken?
It is, can be a receptacle for some CRM and some tracking, but it has full crawling capabilities. So you can search by platform, by country, by reach. So it's flexible. I'd say it's a pretty easy UX, but really, like I said, it's the fact that you can just pay for a month and see how things go. That can be really helpful for people that have not used tools before. No matter, you may land someplace else, but it's a good place to try.
So a lot of the tools I heard mentioned are really tools to identify influencers that have high reach and relevance in and around your areas of promise of product or services. But whatever you do to identify people, what you need to do is ultimately spend time walking in their digital footprint, adding value to their conversation, to ideally initiate them reaching out to you to start a conversation. And those relationships take time. And you're going to need other tools to build and manage relationships. So make sure that you're incorporating some type of tool to take that relationship into ideally a face-to-face engagement. So we have some questions. This one seemed really, really important. It's where does Sam get his beard trimmed? The lines are so perfect. That's from let's see, Michael Phillips. I don't know if you know Michael, but good question.
Wait, is it the swimmer?
Yeah.
Or that's Michael Phelps. Okay, never mind.
No, I don't know Michael at all. But I will give a shout out though. Speaking of influence marketing, New York, Men's Grooming Lounge in Burlington, Ontario. That's where this happens.
There it is.
Yeah, all the time. I'm there regularly every week.
We've got another question from Chuck Royer, and I think this is a question that a lot of us really feel, because there are people on this webinar who are listening who have been doing influencer marketing for some time, and this webinar was not necessarily intended to push influencer marketing to the stratospheric levels. We wanted to start a conversation to help people really sort of get started and to begin to learn about where they could learn more. And towards that, books, blogs, webinars, people to follow, examples of tools. How can people get educated really from the start? And if you guys have some websites or some people, other than the people, of course, all the people here are perfect people to follow. They all have great content. We'll have links to their content at the end. But can you share a couple of sites and places and people that you might recommend?
We mentioned Tracker before. I know they have an Influencer Marketing Academy, and I'm probably saying that wrong, but they have an educational resource that Shonali Burke started for them. And so that's a good introductory resource for people to teach themselves a little bit about it. For B2B specifically, I'd share that we have a series that publishes every Monday. It's an interview with an enterprise B2B technology or enterprise B2B marketer, so a brand marketer, where we talk specifically just about influencer marketing. How is it structured in the organization, their favorite tools, tactics, and so forth. So every Monday on toprankblog.com for the next 2 or 3 months, we have quite a queue. B2B enterprise level company marketers are being interviewed.
Thank you. And I have another question here. Is monetary compensation the most effective way to get an influencer to react?
I will, yeah, I mean, I'd like to chime in on that because we didn't get a chance to talk about contracts or the transactional nature of a lot of influencer marketing. I don't think it's the most effective way, but it is definitely a strategy that many brands use. But the difference is if you're using influencers in a transactional way, it's generally project-based and it's behind a campaign. But we used to call this not influencer marketing, but rather influencer relationship management back in the day, the olden days. And that is a very different beast. That is not where you have to throw money down to have a relationship. Well, I mean, that sounded bad, but you know what I mean. So it's not always the best way to get the best results. It is a fast way to get some results, is kind of the way I look at it with my clients.
Thank you, Marcy. Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. You know, this company Peach Dish that we get meals from, and now I feel like a chef. They use their customers and only their best customers, right? And they feel philosophically that they don't want to pay people, and they feel like they get the best out of it. They start with contests. They say, show us your food on Instagram, and then they also look at how much does that person order, and that's where they get their best influencers from.
Lee, Sam, you guys have an opinion on this?
I think maybe less than 2% of all the campaigns we've done, we've actually paid influencers. I don't believe that it's necessarily the best way to get output. If you can align your values with theirs and you can show that your partnership will add just as much value to them as they will to your audience, that establishes a credibility and an authenticity in the referral that will drive much higher ROI and conversion than simply paying somebody to tweet for you.
And I would say, you know, the vast majority of our engagements are organic, but we are happy to pay. We pay for work product. So when people are going to commit via an agreement or a contract to write 2, 3, 4, 5 blog posts a month for the next quarter or two, you know, they're going to get paid for that. If they're going to contractually be obligated to perform at a certain level or certain outcomes, we're going to pay for that, just like we would pay any other consultant or creative type person. So I think, though, that if you treat influencers purely as an ad buy, which you can, and you apply that to all of your approach to influencer marketing, that's where you can really have some problems. You can really waste a lot of money and waste a lot of time. So it's you know, you've got to choose your battle, so to speak. You've got to choose the specific kinds of situations where it makes the most sense and what type of engagement you're looking for. What can they deliver in return, whether you pay or whether you go organic.
So I'm pretty much in the same boat as you, Lee, and Sam, and Brian and Marcy, in that I think that paying influencers for contracted work to write or publish or do certain things that require them to work is fair. But we've never paid an influencer to talk about us, and I think it's more powerful when they talk about you from the heart. And with that, let's go to the final. Let me know if you guys can see my screen. I wanted to talk about some takeaways that people can take away and bring home with them. These are some links that you can get content from many of the people that are speaking here, where you can start applying some of their ideas immediately Megan, if you can copy and paste these into the chat window. I do want to let you know that this recording, this webinar is recorded. We will send a video recording of it. We'll also send a link to the deck. We'll also send these links in the email so that you have all these handy. But I want to encourage you to follow all of these people. Their Twitter handles are below. Brian Carter, Sam Fiorella, Marcy Masura, Lee Odin. And if you want to connect with me, myself, and tell me a little bit about yourself and how we might be able to help you grow, that would be fantastic. And getting back to the speakers, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to get up on the soapbox and teach and preach others. As I said, I think we're here to help other people grow. And I know most of you personally, and I know that that's what you do on a daily basis, and that's why I love you all. And thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with our Nimble community.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thanks to everybody for tuning in.
Adios, amigas and amigos. Thank you.